Welcome, everyone. Let's see, give you guys some time to get into the room. Oh, we already have one person in the chat. Well, hello, Ann Fisher, watching from snowy Michigan. I love it. I love it. We'll give a few more moments, but I am so excited that you all are joining us this evening. I promise we will have an amazing conversation because our guest tonight is amazing and she has an amazing book. And we're so excited to get into it with you. So I'll just give a few moments. If you're coming into the room, please drop us a comment. Let us know where you are watching from. Let me know also if you have read the book. It's okay if you haven't. It's totally fine. You can still participate in the conversation. You can still add comments, add questions, but we just want to get an idea of who's in the room, so we know how many spoiler alerts we can give or not. So, hey, Coach Robin, I see you checking in. Always good to see you. I know how much you love to read. Oh, Anne said she has read it and loved it. Thank you, Anne, for reading in advance. That always makes the conversation more fun, you know. But again, it's not necessary to have read the book. So while you're waiting for us to officially dive in, feel free to hit the share button, share this to your page, let your friends know that you are in the room, that you're watching, invite them to come watch. The more, the merrier. Hey, Donna Hammond, you have the book. You haven't read it yet. And you're okay, and you're okay with spoilers. Thank you. That's good. Hello, Rolanda.
Wonderful.
Wonderful. I appreciate you all checking into the chat, which is good because we are also doing a book giveaway. So if you are watching tonight, one of the ways that you can be entered to win your free copy of the book is to engage in the chat, leave a question, leave a comment, let us know that you're here, and then I will be selecting a name from those comments, and then I'll follow up with you later in the week so I can get that book out to you. So you guys are already ahead of the curve. Let's see. All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and jump right in officially. You are tuned in to Bronzeville Reads in conversation with Dawn Turner and her new book, Three Girls from Bronzeville. I've got my copy right here. Three Girls from Bronzeville, a uniquely American memoir of race, fate, and sisterhood. We are so excited to have Dawn tonight. I am Sandria Washington. I am the Director of Engagement and Partnerships for Build Bronzeville. You can learn more about our work at buildbronzeville.com. This is being brought to you in partnership tonight with the fantastic team at Simon and Schuster. We love them. And also the Book Joint, which is here in Boxville, new bookstore that just opened in Boxville, 330 East 51st Street. You can also find them online at www.thebookjoint, and that's DA. So I actually am saying thebookjoint.com. Make sure you check them out. If you don't have your copy yet, pop by and see them, or you can order online. And if you're in Chicago, you can pick it up in store in Boxville. Now, before I get into this conversation with Dawn, I want to make sure I do a proper introduction because she is a woman who deserves a proper introduction. Dawn Turner is an award-winning journalist and novelist, a former columnist and reporter for the Chicago Tribune. She spent a decade and a half writing about race, politics, and people whose stories are often dismissed and ignored. Turner, who served as a 2017 and 2018 juror for the Pulitzer Prize in commentary, has written commentary for the Washington Post, PBS NewsHour, CBS Sunday Morning News Show, NPR's Morning Edition show, the Chicago Tonight Show, and elsewhere. She has covered national and presidential conventions, as well as Barack Obama's, shout out to Barack Obama, 2008 presidential election and inauguration. Turner has also reported from around the world in countries such as Australia, France, and Ghana. She spent the 2014 and 2015 school year as a Neiman Journalism Fellow at Harvard University. In 2018, she served as a fellow and journalist in residence at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics. Turner is the author of 2 novels, Only Twice I've Wished for Heaven, and an eighth on August. In 2018, she established the Dawn M. Turner and Kim D. Turner Endowed Scholarship in Media at her alma mater, the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, which also just happens to be my alma mater. Yes, yes. Went there a long time ago, but I love that you have established this in your sister's honor. Thank you so much, Dawn, for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. I'm so excited to be here. It's like coming back home.
Yes. You know? So let's just start there with home, because I know there are some people who haven't read the book, and of course there are those who have. Let's start with the Bronzeville that you remember, the Bronzeville that you grew up in. How would you describe it?
Yeah, and so I'm going to go even a little farther back, because my great-grandparents arrived in Bronzeville in 1916, and that was during the first wave of the Great Migration. And I heard so many stories about the community from my grandmother, years later, just what it meant to come to Chicago. And I mean, searching for the American dream, and to kind of have that dream be turned into something that was something sometimes sort of a nightmare. And as you know, they were the new Black migrants were forced to live in a narrow strip of land on the near South Side called the Black Belt. And then it would eventually, maybe a couple of decades later, be called, affectionately called Bronzeville. Mm-hmm. But this was a community that was vibrant in so many ways in terms of art. You had at one time Gwendolyn Brooks, who is still my hero, and I bow at her writing altar, who lived here. You had Richard Wright, who lived in Bronzeville. And you had Dr. Daniel Hell Williams, who was the first surgeon to perform the first successful heart surgery. Not the first Black surgeon, but the first surgeon to do this. Mm-hmm. You had the first Black bank in Bronzeville. You had the second Black insurance company, the first Black insurance company in the North. So there was all of this culture, and my sister and my best friend and I, decades later, would inherit that legacy of excellence and innovation, but the area was also deformed by redlining and restrictive housing covenants. And so what happened was you had a group of people who, as my grandmother would say, and I quoted her in the book, took a bunch of scraps and stitched together a world. And that world, when my sister Kim and my best friend Deborah and I were coming of age in the 1970s, we were growing up in the Theodore K. Lawless Gardens apartments, and we were coming of age in the aftermath of the afterglow of the civil rights movement. And it was a time when our parents believed that this country was finally amenable to giving us the opportunities that it had denied generations of Black folks. And we were going to go to college. We were going to have great paying jobs, and we were going to become homeowners and partake of the American dream. But in the 1970s, part of that dream for us was this brand new apartment complex. And so that's where we were growing up. But right across the street, directly across the street, was the Ida B. Wells homes, named after someone who had lived in the community, and the anti-lynching journalist who was just spectacular, bow at her altar as well. Yes. But this housing project was named after her. And but by the time we were coming of age in the 1970s, it had begun to deteriorate. And so you had these two communities side by side. And then I also talk about Lake Meadows, which was just across the street to the north, but they were almost three different worlds. And Kim, Deborah, and I, as we were growing up, we were navigating those worlds.
And it's so interesting. I have friends who live in Lake Meadows now. And
Yeah.
so when you think about, the past of it, I'm like, wow, like this was just completely different. At one point, this was kind of the dream for families, for our Black families to get to these places.
Well, Lake Meadows was kind of the stopover place before people, who wanted to own homes, but it was a nice place. And I think Lake Meadows is still a nice place.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's still kind of that transition too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
So in writing your book, of course, memoir is a very personal thing to write. How did you come to the conclusion that you would write this as an intersecting story? So it's not just your story, but really focus on the lives of two other girls, women, and their families.
Right. Well, it was my sister and myself, and then Deborah. So two families, but you're absolutely right. I mean, the story the story was about three girls,
Mhm.
and what I wanted to do was talk about how we started out in virtually the same place with very similar aspirations at a time when our parents had these high hopes and dreams for us, big dreams for us, and just talk about our divergent paths. And so I thought that each of our individual stories, I mean, were pretty powerful, maybe, but definitely to braid the three together was, I think, a much more complicated and a story that was probably one that was reflective, that could tell a larger story. I've been so pleased and honored and grateful to hear people say to me during this book tour that they see themselves in maybe in one of us or the three of us or some combination. And I think that adds to the power of the story, that we were very much alike, but very, very different.
Yes, yes. Did you ever grapple with, is this my story to tell, when you're telling Kim's experiences or Deborah's experiences? And I know we talked a little bit before we went live about the podcast that I do, the Black Adoption Podcast, and that's one of the things that we grapple with when
Right.
you're telling these very vulnerable stories, and other people's stories intersect your story. So how
Right.
much do you tell? How much do you share? Is it yours to tell? Did you grapple with that?
Well, I met my sister when I was 3 years old, and that's when my parents brought her home. And I met Deborah when I was 7 years old, but we didn't become best friends until we were eight. And in some ways, my story is their story, and their story is my story. And our fates could have been interchanged, because I do believe that being a Black woman, having been a Black girl in America, I mean, there are these minefields, and there are these places where just so much can happen that you didn't expect. But you're absolutely right. I still needed to get permission. So Deborah, when Deborah, and I've been giving away the story. So I
Yeah,
apologize.
there will be spoilers, you guys.
Yeah, there are spoilers. So what happens is that my sister passes away at 24, and then Deborah goes to prison at 34. And I say that because I wrote about Deborah in the pages of the Chicago Tribune. I was a columnist there for a long time, and a reporter, and an editor, actually. But I wrote about her when I was still an editor at the Tribune, and in 2000, during her trial. I wrote about her again in 2002, and then again in 2007. But I say that because at that time, Deborah and I talked about this being a story. We didn't talk about it necessarily, about it being what type of story specifically. But so I had her permission to tell her story in the pages of the Chicago Tribune, and then as a book. And my sister, well, I couldn't get her permission, but my mother became her proxy.
Mm.
And I talked, and my mother, and it was very important for me to get my mother's permission to tell my sister's story, because that was her daughter. And it's one thing with me being her sister, but her child. And I wanted my mother's permission because I wanted to be able to tell that story because I believe that Kim's story, again, has and I don't want it sounds very lofty to say, oh, well, it'll make a difference in somebody's life, but it was really important to me to tell that story because I did believe, and I still do believe, that it has a larger meaning and purpose. And then my mother's story, to tell her story,
Yeah.
that I needed to get her permission for that as well. So you're right. I mean, these are stories that are incredibly layered and challenging. These are, people's lives. And so I needed to make sure that even as I was writing, that I said to my mother, to Deborah, can I tell this story? Can I? And I wanted to get permission and over and over. And then, as I did with my journalism, when I was telling someone else's story, there are times even when you get permission, but then you still don't tell that part of the story.
Yeah.
Because the way it looks in print is very different from the way it's,
the context.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to see it in print sometimes can be devastating. So there are some stories that I just didn't include because that was my own decision, my own editorial decision not to include those stories.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up your mom, because when I started reading it, I immediately had the thought, this could have been called Four Girls from Bronzeville, because I felt like her story was so pivotal to the foundation, just for your story and for Kim's, and just the decisions she had to make as a young wife, a young mother. And I'm like, yeah, her story definitely is very much entwined into all of this.
Yeah. And my mom she really wasn't that young of a wife or mother. My mom was, I think, 29 when she had me, and then 32 when she had my sister. And I know what you mean by young.
Yeah.
I mean, that's still
because
relative.
now, I have friends that are like 40.
But she was still, she was savvier than someone, let's say 10 years her junior or something. And so, but yeah, I understand. I just wanted to give a little bit of context there.
Yeah. Did she read the book, or what was her feedback?
My mother has not read the book yet, but she will read it. And but as I said, anything that any and everything that if I had question, if there was something that I felt viscerally that I just needed to check in with her about, I mean, all of that, I got her permission to tell each of those stories, that especially the stories that are parts of her life that were a lot more challenging, that I wanted to make sure, because again, it's context, that the reader needed to understand. You can't really understand me or my sister without understanding our parents. Yeah. And the same thing is true of Deborah and her family. And so, but that's how we are. And the gift here is that we're close enough to be able to say that, that when this happened, then I felt it because, it's my mother and I love her, my father, and I love him, even though we had a challenging relationship. If any of that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Total sense. I want to read a couple of comments that have come in, because they kind of fit this portion of the conversation. Let's see. Dr. McLean Davidson Denise says, the book is a journey in cultural memory. I like that. So many of us were juxtaposed to these three girls from Bronzeville. And then Beth King writes, your sharing of Kim's and Deborah's stories is very respectful and done with love.
Thank you. Yeah, it was important to me that I did not want this to be a story about one girl telling all the business of the girls.
She's the good girl. She's the good one that made it.
Exactly. Well, and then how do you define made it?
Right.
but and I understand what you're saying, but I didn't want it also to be that, that I did everything right and they did everything wrong, because that is absolutely not true. Because I do foundationally believe, and I know that this statement is a little fraught, but I do believe there, but for the grace of God, go I. And all I mean by that is that, you can do things that are closer to being right and still land in a place where you never expected.
Yeah.
And so all of this stuff is, we do the best we can. And then people who have to grapple with addiction, you just don't know their story and you don't know why they're self-medicating, and so to see them at that place where they're dealing with crack or they're dealing with alcoholism, to see them in that moment does not give you the full picture of their lives. And that's what I've wanted to be sensitive to and about in the stories that I tell of other people. Because, someone who looks down and out now, you never know
Right.
where they came from or where they're going if they can get beyond this moment.
Right.
So all of that was really important to me.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of Oprah, and I forget the name of the co-author. I want to say Dr. Perry. They
Okay.
came out with a book earlier this year, What Happened to You? And your statement just makes me think about that. If somebody is dealing with addiction, or, maybe they're on a not so good path, instead of looking at what they're doing, it's really about how do we look at the why? What happened to you? And
And it's so important but we get super judgy in that regard. And we think that, and I will botch this expression, but it's the whole notion of somebody lands on third base and they think they've hit a triple. And the reality is that, they were kind of put there. They had different opportunities. And so I think that whole idea that when we look at people, even people who have been in prison, I knew Deborah's story. I knew her when she was this little kid who was in the second grade. As I said, I met her initially there, but in the third grade, we became best friends. And she rescued my childhood, because my parents had just divorced, and I was bereft. I was confused. I didn't understand. I was quiet and introvert, and she just kind of brought me out of that whole period. So when she goes to prison years later, she's still my friend.
yeah. No, it reminds me of my third grade best friend. I still remember her, my third grade teacher, and she was just so much more outgoing. And it's almost like you need that balance. Like you said, she rescued you and kind of brought you out of yourself.
Right.
When you think about friendships between Black girls, Black women, and you think about this loyalty and love, because I feel like you had just a very fierce love for Deborah and your sister and loyalty to them. And there's this saying, ride or die, be a ride or die friend. And are there limits to that? Are there conditions to that? And when I read your story, I feel like you had a very unconditional type of love. So even though they may have experienced some very hard things and they took some different paths, you never wrote them off and literally was there until the end. Do you see it that way, or were there some conditions there?
Well, I think all of life and all of love is somewhat conditional, but it just depends on the person and what are those conditions. And there were times when for my sister, it was just incredibly exhausting and frustrating. But I just we did not get to a point where I was going to not be there for her. Deborah was farther away in Indianapolis, but she has an older sister and a very supportive family as well. And there are times when you just want to shake them and say, wake up.
Yeah.
And so yes, I felt that, but I can't imagine now, and this is all hindsight at this point. But when we were in the throes of all of that, there wasn't anything that I saw that they could have done that would completely alienate me. Or, again, there were frustrating moments, but that's life, and you have to just kind of deal with those moments, and then you get back in the fight. And I have to say that I did not know. I had never seen my sister drink. No, that's not true. I'd never saw my sister drunk.
Mm.
And my mother was much more concerned about her consumption of alcohol than I was. She was 24 years old. Most of her peers were drinking, and that's kind of a rite of passage, for young people. And so there was nothing in me that thought that she would die of alcoholism.
Mm.
Because I'd never seen it. We had older relatives. A lot of people have older relatives who drink and who are highly functional.
Right.
But I just didn't. So, but that's hindsight. And that was during a time too when we didn't talk, the drugs that were bad were heroin, were, maybe cocaine or something. This was pre-crack. And so we just didn't know of anybody. I didn't know of anybody dying of alcoholism. Yeah.
Mm. It makes me think about, so one of the things I wanted to touch on was just about this concept of trauma and generational healing. So when we think about things like substance abuse, domestic violence, all the different things that happen in our families, those are things that we typically just don't talk about. Sometimes because it's the lack of awareness, and sometimes it's just because, if you're of a certain era, a certain generation, you just don't speak about those things that happen in the family. When you look back, as you were writing this story and you look back over everything, are there moments where you wish that certain things had been spoken about more, maybe more freely or followed up on? So like one incident in particular, when you saw your mother and father as a child, and there's domestic violence happening, and your mother saw you see them, and so it's a known thing that you're aware of it, but it's never fully addressed. Do you wish that you could kind of go back like, oh, I wish we had talked about it more. I wish that someone had checked on me to see how I was processing it.
Yeah. No. And I'll tell you why. Because we did have conversations about, because I stopped eating, for a while, didn't eat a whole lot. And so that was the conversation about how do we get this kid to eat. But to address it straight on, that was kind of not the thing back then. But and here's what was so much more important at that time for me than actually talking about exactly what happened. My mother knew that she was not going to abide anyone striking her in any way. Mm-hmm. And so to say that it was one time was not, that didn't matter. That one time was it. That was the deal breaker for her. And so what I saw, and you know how people say sometimes show don't tell. Mm-hmm. So what I was shown rather than what I was told was I call my aunt and my grandmother the moving crew. Mm-hmm. The next morning, after the tumult, after the violence, they moved him out.
Yeah.
And so that became my lesson, right? I mean, that was the conversation.
They called his job to come move him, which I was like, I love it.
Like, oh no. And so it didn't. So the lesson that I learned without anybody saying a word was that no man has the right, no person has the right to put their hands on you, mm-hmm. his or her hands on you. You just don't do that. And if that happens, then they have to go. And so that was the lesson that I learned. But I also learned that because we all in this life are going to go through something. We do not get out of this life, especially if you live a few years, mm-hmm. without experiencing some degree of trauma. I don't care what your zip code is, where in the world you live, you're going to go through something. But when you have people who fundamentally love you, and I may have been a snit as an adolescent or a teenager or something, but I never ever questioned whether I was loved. And it breaks my heart sometimes when I look at young people who may never know what that feels like. That we were not rich at all. We were poor. But we had every need met. And foundationally, love was key. So when I don't know that I had to, that later on I will have that conversation with my father. But with my mother, it was not something, or my grandmother, I knew that I was loved by my uncles, my aunt, my mom, and even my dad in his weird way. That was not questioned. And my sister the same way. We were loved, and we were allowed to be children. And that is something that some young people find elusive these days as well. They are forced to grow up so fast. And so again, I'll go back to Deborah's role in my life, that she came into my life at a critical moment. And that was as, the moving crew had moved my dad out, and my mom was then a single parent. And Deborah, Deborah was just my friend, and we were allowed to do little girl things.
And for a lot of little girls, especially when I think about little Black girls in 2021, a lot of them don't have that opportunity to just be little girls, just be kids. And especially for Black girls, which, this story is 3 girls from Bronzeville, but specifically 3 Black girls from Bronzeville, which is a very distinct thing. Black girls automatically, we're adultified, and if we do something, we're being fast, we're being grown, we should have known better. And it doesn't matter if we're 4 years old, we should have known better. There's these expectations that just don't allow us to be kids. And so when you think about you and Kim and Deborah growing up in Bronzeville as these little Black girls who still very much have a sense of innocence.
Yes.
How does Bronzeville shape you as Black girls? How does that time period of the 70s shape you as Black girls, and the things that were happening around you shape you as Black girls growing up in Black Chicago?
Right. I think that we had, I spoke earlier about our parents having these big dreams for us, but that was the case as well for our teachers. They saw we were the generation right after the Civil Rights Movement, and they were expecting these doors to open. Now, a lot of people would quickly be disabused of that because it happened a little bit, and then it didn't happen a lot of it. But I do think that because we had that at school, we had people who were just trying to shape us and mold us and teach us and feed us so much knowledge about ourselves. That was the time where, Black is beautiful. And we were coming right after that. That was maybe the late 60s, but there was still that the residual, just love from that. And I had several teachers who had afros, and I think about that now. And it was just, they wanted us to develop into whole people, because there's so many opportunities, so many obstacles, so many instances where, anything can kind of cut you up into pieces. And that was, and so we were able to be kids. It was not perfect, because I was an adolescent when I was assaulted on the lakefront. But again, it's one of those things where it was a moment where I knew that I had people surrounding me. I had people who were going to come, who were going to come to my aid, and who were going to be there to help safeguard. the rest of the path or whatever. But yeah, so it was. I mean, growing up in Bronzeville, I didn't understand the history of the place
Mm.
until I was well into I should say I didn't appreciate the history of the place until I was well into adulthood. You know, to know that I come from a people and a place of strivers where people were just really trying to make a way out of no way. And at the same time, you know, when I was a kid, I was able to be a kid.
Mm. How do we get that back in 2021? How do we, as families, or as the village, as I like to say, how do we try to instill a little bit of that into the young people who are here in 2021?
Well, I think that our communities ha have such a lack of resources, and there's so much want and need that when you look at the, you know, our Deborah's parents, Kim's and my parents, they may have, you know, been struggling with all kinds of stuff,
Mhm.
and they were, I know they were, but that wasn't something that trickled down to us. That wasn't something that we felt at our core. And if someone said, okay, well, you can't have this or you can't have that, it was, I mean, that was the extra that you couldn't have. Whatever you needed, you know, as I said, those needs were met. And so I think that there are so many communities where there are so many holes, where there are so many things that people need on so many different levels. And so not just children needing them, but the adults needing them. And the if you walk down a street and there's garbage that's, you know, that's littering the street, and you look at street lights that whose bulbs have blown out and they haven't been replaced, and then you walk into a building and there's so much decay, and this is your world. You cannot walk down the street to a grocery store to get fresh fruits and vegetables.
Mhm.
You cannot walk down the street to get to a hospital or any of these resources, but you are acutely aware that maybe a mile from you or a few blocks from you, all of the institutions work, including policing as well as the schools.
Mhm.
And so, you know, this isn't a surprise. It's that, you know, it's not a surprise when people, the anxiety that people are feeling now because of COVID, you know, people who've not felt that level of anxiety
Yeah.
where they don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, that's not unique, or that's not something that's not unfamiliar to people in beleaguered communities. And so when you talk about how do you get back this whole idea of, and you know, again, I grew up in a place that was not rich at all, but there's something about having as a foundation, as a stepping off place where you feel like you're loved, where you feel like you're cared for, where you feel like, you know, the place is clean. I mean, right there in Lawless Gardens where I grew up, I always say the janitors chased down garbage with a religious fervor,
Hmm.
you know, because because when you live in a place that's clean,
Yeah.
where you know, where the lobbies are clean and the elevators are clean and shiny, then it makes you feel a certain way. If you live in a place where there's garbage everywhere and where nothing works, that makes you feel a certain way as well. And so there's so many things that we have to do inside the homes as well as outside.
Yes.
And but we have to do it. It's not optional,
Yeah. No, I
you
was
know.
gonna say it definitely has to be a team effort, because the parents can have all the love and all the care in the home, but then when that child steps outside the home or steps into the classroom, you want to make sure everybody's on the same page to say these children deserve safe spaces
Right.
wherever they step.
You know, when I was growing up, the public housing project right across the street, as I said, the Ida B. Wells homes, they've since been raised. I was, a lot of my classmates went to the elementary school where I attended. But it was a different place. So there was decay in the buildings that had begun, but there were still families that were incredibly strong. And there were families who did look at the public housing as a stopover place, and they wanted to get the hell out of there as soon as they can.
Mhm.
But crack really was a game changer. And that, so however open the door was for people my age who were, who were coming of age during that time, it had begun to close. And then I believe it slammed shut when crack started to infect the neighborhood. So, I mean, it's a very complicated. We can talk about why, but we need to do that as we're still having the conversation with how do we fix this?
Right.
And it frustrates me when people say, "Oh, the toothpaste is out of the tube." Well, find another tube.
Mm.
Find some more tooth. We don't have a choice.
Yeah.
We look at what's happening today, and I'm not one who romanticizes yesteryear, but I do know that you have to have some degree of, you have to have something to lose. If you have people who have nothing to lose, then they will act that way. So you have to give people something to lose. We look at some of the crime as a morality thing. And yeah, I mean, morality plays a role, but it's also about survival.
Yes.
And so who am I? So I don't do bad things in part, not because I'm a good person, but I don't want my finances to be affected.
Right.
I don't want my reputation to be affected. I mean, those are things for me. I mean, that's something to lose. But if people don't have something to lose, then what do you do? I mean, that's probably, I think it was James Baldwin who said this. I mean, that is a dangerous person, somebody who has nothing to lose.
Mm-hmm. Or if what they're living for, I think about the Biggie lyric, and he talks about he was selling crack just to feed his daughter, so it's not that this is an inherently malicious person who wants to rob and steal and beat people, but it's the larger mission of how do I care for my daughter? It's about survival. And so again,
Right.
it goes back to why are people doing what they do?
And you're living in a situation that is inherently malicious, in that whatever whether you have disinvestment in the community where you can't get a job there,
Mm-hmm.
or the schools are not doing what they need to do that help you, that prepare you for a job where you can feed your daughter.
Right.
I mean, all of that stuff comes to play. And so if you are in survival mode and you've got to feed somebody or yourself, then, I mean, we don't want to think about that part, that where we're not, and this isn't giving people excuses.
Right.
It is just reality. We all have to, in order to live, or in order to help people live, they have to be housed, they have to be fed. Think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
We have these needs. We're not talking about people trying to get, an expensive car or an expensive that. We're talking about the fundamental basic needs being met.
Mm. So,
and if that is what's on your agenda for the day, I mean, that was not something that we thought about. We being my sister, my best friend, and myself.
Mm.
My sister, my best friend, and I mean, we didn't think about that.
Yeah.
We got a chance to think about stuff, like, well, how come I can't have this dress?
Right. Things that kids should be thinking about.
Right.
There's a quote, and first I have to say your writing is just immaculate, right? Like, it's just amazing, it's beautiful, it's lyrical, but you have a line.
Well, let me just say that's a process. It doesn't come out that way.
Well, the end result is immaculate. But one of my favorite lines, because I underlined several, you wrote that, quote, "I decided to live my life." And it's such a simple phrase, but when I read it, it just hit me. And in the context of when you said it, this is when you were at U of I and essentially like being kicked out, and you're trying to, get your stuff together. And there's all this other stuff happening around you, happening with Kim, Deborah, this, that, and the other. And so you make this statement, "I decided to live my life." And for me, it just felt so empowering. And so I wanted to have you just talk a little bit about um, your headspace at that time and in that moment when you said that. And then how does that still kind of ring true for you even today? Because I think there's something powerful about deciding, you decided to live your life.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a very young kid, I was told that I should go to college. And I have to I always like to say that Deborah and Kim were incredibly smart, brilliant actually. And but because they were willful and so teachers focused on something else for them. But for me, teachers said, "Oh, you should go to college." And so that, my I set my sights on college, and then I got there my freshman year and I was invited to leave because
Invited to leave.
my grade point average sucked. And I also like to say it wasn't because I was partying, but I was protesting,
Mhm.
but I was with the partiers and that I was told to leave.
It's a party
And
school, at least when I was there.
well, it was not when I was there. Party school, but it didn't matter because I was still asked to leave. But I guess the point is that I got super serious after that, but I'm still kind of, and not a whole lot, but still dealing with what's going on at home
Mhm.
and the challenges my sister was having, and then Deborah's. And then I just decided, you know what? I have to focus on my dream, which is I want to get this degree. And then I did wind up, I wound up finishing in 4 years, and I got on the dean's list several times.
Mhm.
And so, but it was a matter of me focusing because I decided that I was still there for my sister, but I also needed to show up for me. And my goal was to get a degree, and I knew how important that would be in changing the trajectory of my life. And so I was, I would drive home. I burned up 57 I-57, so many years, and
Yeah.
just kind of going. I had my own car and just going up and down Interstate 57. But I had to that night, and I think I had learned that Deborah was doing something crazy as well. And I just said, you know what? I love them both,
Mm.
and I'm here for them, but I'm also here for me.
Yeah. Because I imagine it could have been so easy to, once you were invited to leave, uh, to kind of just throw yourself into what they had going on because, if you had some shame
Yeah.
around, oh my God, I'm being
Oh, there was
kicked
a
out of
lot of
school. And so even though you felt that shame, you could have taken, I won't say the easy way out, but you could have said, "Oh, I'm going to put school on the back burner. Let me help Kim. Let me help Deborah. Let me do this," and just take the focus off of myself. So I love that you um, showed up for yourself and kind of had some tough love, like I can't remember if he was a professor or a guidance counselor. He had some tough love. He was not easy. So
yeah, Dean Copeland. You didn't get a chance to
yeah.
meet him, but he was God to this day. I just adore him. But I think that it's really, really important to say that for some reason, and I don't know why I did this, but I've mostly surrounded myself with people who were kind of running in the same direction that I was running in.
Mhm.
And my future father-in-law was the one who told me. So it wasn't me, getting by. I didn't get back there, but back to the University of Illinois in Urbana by myself. The letter, my invitation to leave said, you have to sit out for a year. And it said that's not negotiable. And it was my future father-in-law, James Trice, who told me, Dawn, everything is negotiable.
Mhm.
And so my future husband and I drove back to the university, and I was able to plead my case with the dean, who was amazing, an African American guy, Dean Copeland, who told me, okay, sit out for a semester.
Mm.
And really, that made a huge difference, a semester compared to a year. I went to a community college, got my grades up, and made sure that
Mhm.
the grades would transfer. And I got back there, and there was no foolishness,
Yeah.
Maybe I would walk past Shantytown on the quad, protesting apartheid, and I'd just keep walking.
Like, y'all not gonna get me again. Like, no. Mm-mm.
So, I still did a little something, but I was laser focused on why I was supposed to be there and what I was supposed to do.
No, I love that. There was so many pivotal just lessons wrapped up in that section. So thank you for shedding some light on that. Um, let's see. Ann Hilton Fisher in the comments, she said, I decided to live my life in the quotes. She said, I'm so glad you brought that up because that also struck me as such a pivotal point. Yes, extremely pivotal. Coach Robin is laughing at invited to leave. It's such a beautiful way to say that. I love that. I was invited to leave.
The other thing with me deciding to live my life, I knew that both Kim and Deborah had incredible support systems beyond me. So I wasn't the only person that they were depending on. And so it wasn't like I couldn't do that. I could. My mother, my father, my grandmother, my aunt, especially for my sister, Deborah's parents and her grandmother. I mean, they were all in it trying to save these two. The loves of my life.
Yeah.
And they just, so I was able to do my own thing. I wasn't completely, so anyway, it was possible because they had a network.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. As we are winding down, you guys, if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. We only have a few more minutes, just under 10 minutes. So if you have a question for Dawn, please type it in. I'm just looking through the comments here. Let's see. Lisa Lewis says that she hasn't read the book yet, but she's so happy for the birth of this story. She knows that it was a labor of love. Let's.
We were at UOI together.
Yes.
Although she wasn't invited to leave.
Oh no, right.
She was ahead of me. No, Lisa's my friend.
Awesome. Thank you for tuning in, Lisa. Let's see. Denise says it sounds like your village was in alignment with you. So just supporting you in choosing yourself and deciding to live for yourself. Let's see. Oh, Rolanda Washington has a question. She wants to know, at what point did you know that you wanted to share these stories in a book?
Oh my God. I think that, well, as a writer, I mean, we tend to process, things in writing, but you're right. It didn't necessarily have to be a book. But in 2010, when The Other Wes Moore was published, then, I mean, at the time, my last name was Trice. And it's the same last name. It's Deborah's last name. And so I figured, and The Other Wes Moore is a story of two young men in Baltimore who kind of lived in neighborhoods that weren't far away, but one goes to prison for life without possibility of parole for killing a police officer, and the other one becomes, I believe it's a Rhodes Scholar, and then winds up working for various, in the White House and all of that. And so the whole, it was their different, very different lives. And so I thought it occurred to me that I hadn't read many stories about women and their divergent paths, and especially not about Black women. And then nothing that took the long view, this longitudinal look. I knew, as I said, I knew Kim since I was 3, and then I met Deborah when I was 7. And so we had all of these years together. And so I just thought that it could be a book. And then I struggled with how to tell it. Story. So that's why I'm so grateful when people say, "Oh, it reads like this." I'm like, blood on.
Well done, well done. Let's see. Lorene Kennard, she says she can't wait to read, and she wants to know, are you working on another book or project?
Yes, I am working on 3 books.
Woo!
Which is astounding to me because finding the story is always difficult. But I am working on 3 projects. I will not say anything about either one of them right now, but it's just such a gift to have stories. And they are novels.
Okay.
So this whole thing about real life, I I'll do that again sometime later, but I'm happy to dabble in fiction again.
Fantastic. Well, we're looking forward to that. Olivia Pearl says, "You are such a courageous person." And she's so happy to listen to it on Audible while reading it. So she's doing both. She's reading and she's listening to your story on Audible. I love it. I love it. I
So
love it. Um,
yeah,
oh, go ahead.
no, I mean, I don't know how courageous it is, but it was a story that I felt I had to tell. And as I said, I think I said to you earlier, that you don't tell these stories just for them to be, because you're seeking therapy or something that's cathartic. I mean, you tell it because maybe it has a larger purpose, and maybe someone can see themselves in your story, or they can learn something. But yeah, it's well, thank you for talking about courage. But
Yes, yes. No, super courageous and inspiring. Someone else said inspiring. Beth King wants to know, she says, you mentioned mentors and supporters as key touchstones. You also mentioned choir. What other extracurriculars did you do? And how do you think they shaped you?
oh, girl, well, honey, I was in the choir at church where anybody can be in the choir. And if you hear me sing right now, you would know that it was a loving church. Um, and, but in terms of mentors, oh my goodness, I have had so many people who have stepped in and shaped my life. One of the reasons why I wanted the scholarship was so important to me. It was because maybe I could, and it is for specifically people who can tell, who want to tell our stories, Black stories, and tell them in a nuanced way and go beyond the stereotypes of those things that we think we know. And that's very important too, because our stories are important.
Yeah.
But in terms of mentors, I've had so many people who were able to guide me and to give me advice, and to also say, you're not supposed to be doing that, and who could be very, very real in and like, okay, you can do better. My grandmother would always be, A minus. Oh no, you could do better. that kind of thing, which is you like it's an A, but
Right.
but who love you enough, who can, I mean, they build you up, but they can also tell you, when you can do better, and when you are better, when you should be better. And that's incredibly important. And so I've had just a gift amount of mentors.
Awesome. Awesome. That was an excellent question. Thank you guys so much for participating in the chat. Dawn, it has truly been a pleasure to be in conversation with you and get some more behind the scenes of the book. For those of you who participated tonight, again, please feel free to share this conversation. So the live will save on our page, so you can go back, you can rewatch it, you can share it. Again, you can visit the book joint, get your copy of the book. You can get it online. I will also, as I mentioned earlier, be choosing one person from the chat to win a free copy of the book. So be on the lookout for that. Hopefully it's you, whoever you are. And I just thank you all for tuning in tonight. You can follow Build Bronzeville on Instagram and, of course, here on Facebook, as well as our other pages, Boxville, the forum, and all of the other things. But you can find them all at Build Bronzeville and then search from there. And of course, you can follow Dawn on Instagram as well. So make sure you follow her. We appreciate you for tuning in, and we will see you next time for Bronzeville Reads. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful time.
Thank you.
Happy to be back
Yes,
home.
thank you.
Thank you.